The autumn season is upon us. Is that notable for the property market?
Yes, the first week of September generally heralds the beginning of the traditional autumn selling season in the commercial property market. September 2020 will again mark a turning point for the market. However, the autumn season will be different this year as all sectors of the property market adapt to a new reality following 6 unprecedented months during which record transaction activity came to an abrupt halt. Structural issues that had already been visible in the market were significantly accelerated and huge societal change occurred.
Can we expect to see an increase in activity over the coming months?
Yes, we can. A number of transactions are already underway in the market. Some closed during the summer and several assets are actually ready to be formally launched. In fact, we've about 1 billion of assets that are expected to come over the next while. Some campaigns will inevitably be delayed by the latest set of government restrictions, which reversed some aspects of reopening and will require some non-essential work to be done from home for the foreseeable future. Hence, we're back filming in my house again this month, as opposed to the office where we filmed in July.
Don't travel restrictions mean that investors or occupiers can't travel to Ireland?
They do, and although travel restrictions will, for the foreseeable future, limit the ability of some people to travel to Ireland to inspect buildings and do things like conducting due diligence, vendors and agents have begun to embrace technology and are devising alternative solutions to enable potential occupiers and investors to review opportunities remotely. This could mean, however, that some domestic investors and entities that have decision makers in country will have a distinct advantage over the coming months. Signs of increased activity will become visible first in the investment sector of the market. Recovery will, however, be slower to materialise in the occupier and the development land sectors of the market. From an economic perspective, the fact that temporary wage subsidies and pandemic unemployment payments are to be extended out until the spring of next year, as well as the 2% reduction in VAT, it will provide some support for sectors of the market that remain under pressure, such as the hotel and the retail sectors. Wage supports will also continue to prove hugely supportive of rents in the multifamily sector, which has continued to perform really well over the last 6 months.
So how has the office sector of the market been performing?
With office occupiers now working remotely for almost 6 months, it's fair to say that the impact on office occupier activity is worse than we anticipated in March. Occupiers who had slowly started to return to the office in the last couple of months have now been formally asked by government to continue to work remotely where possible until at least the 13th of September, and that is further delaying the commencement of what is generally one of the busiest periods of the year in the office leasing market. There are some transactions that completed during July and August, and there are others which are due to sign over the coming weeks, and that will be a boost for the market. But the expectation is that Q3 will show a marked improvement on the previous quarter, which was the lowest on record. Having said that, large-scale expansion and relocation decisions are expected to remain firmly on hold until such time as decision makers can travel, but equally until such time as companies can determine their long-term headcount space requirements. Therefore, despite a pickup in activity in the last few months, the likelihood is that office leasing activity in many European cities, not least Dublin, will remain subdued for the foreseeable future in comparison to the record levels of volumes of activity that we've seen in the last couple of years. As we anticipated, there has been an increase in lease re-gears, and we've also seen some incidents of occupiers looking to sublet excess office accommodation over the last couple of weeks. The volume of grey space, as it's called, that comes available over the next while will dictate the overall rate of office vacancy over the next couple of months. However, I think it's important to say that a critical difference in this cyclical downturn is the fact that vacancy will be largely unaffected by new supply in this cycle, because much of the new office accommodation that's coming on stream has been pre-let in advance. And some schemes are obviously delayed also in the current climate. There's continued speculation about the future of the office, and that has led to increased demand for flexible office solutions over the last couple of months, particularly from companies who are at this stage unsure of their future headcount requirements or unwilling to commit to long-term leases in the current climate. But I think the key focus for office occupiers over the next couple of months will be on ensuring a safe return to the office for those staff that are in a position to go back, with occupier demand expected to rebound next year when travel restrictions are lifted and economic activity ultimately picks up, which it will. The next couple of months could actually be a window of opportunity for occupiers who are in a position to take advantage of the ability to negotiate keener deals in the current climate.
The industrial and logistics sector is reportedly faring well. Is this true?
It is. I suppose compared to other sectors of the property market, the industrial and logistics sector has weathered the pandemic storm particularly well, and there's continued occupier activity off market underway, lots of deals in legals, and that's hugely encouraging. However, some occupier types, such as those involved in leisure or certain parts of retail, are particularly vulnerable because of their direct exposure to economic activity and trade. That said, other parts of the industrial and logistics market have actually benefited from lockdown, with the need for high quality modern logistics and distribution space more important than ever. And we've seen increased appetite for buildings of more than 60,000 square feet over the last couple of months, boosted by an increase in online retailing, but also increased demand for storage and distribution of inventory such as pharmaceuticals and foodstuffs. We've also seen strong demand for industrial sites from data centre operators over the last number of months, with these end users typically competing directly with traditional developers for well-located land parcels, particularly in and around the M50 corridor, but also in some prime regional locations as well. We expect prime rents in the industrial sector to remain unchanged for the rest of 2020, primarily due to the fact that there's no new stock due for delivery anytime soon that isn't pre-committed, such as the strength of appetite for modern premises that negotiations in some cases have started on stock that hasn't even commenced construction yet.
How has the retail sector been trading over the summer?
Although there was a dramatic improvement in retail sales activity during the summer months, during June and July in particular, this came from an exceptionally low base. Consumers have effectively adjusted their shopping behaviours in the last 6 months. More trade is now occurring online, and physical shopping is now much more tactical than experiential. Conditions remain very challenging, and several retailers have had to make the difficult decision to actually close some or all of their Irish stores. Many stores that have fully reopened have also reported that footfall is depressed and turnover has been negatively impacted.
What sectors of retail have been worse affected in your opinion?
The effect has been particularly felt on high streets around the country, which are suffering from a combination of reduced store capacity and a lack of office workers, a lack of overseas tourists, a lack of students. Retail parks and shopping centres have been performing somewhat better by virtue of the fact that they're in a better position to enforce social distancing. Although there has been some transactional activity and evidence of some retailers opening new stores, vacancy has in many cases continued to increase, and there's been an escalation in negotiation between landlords and tenants, many of whom are really struggling to meet rent and service charge payments in the current climate. Landlords in some cases are slow to make decisions, but we're also seeing incidences of leases being restructured and temporary arrangements being put in place, particularly where retailers can provide figures to clearly demonstrate the extent of decline in trade that has been experienced.
Although you are expecting to see an uptick in investment activity from this point forward, investment spend for 2020 will still be down, won't it?
It will. About 1.7 billion was spent during the first half of the year, and there are several sizable transactions that were signed during the summer months, and that will provide a welcome boost in Q3. There's also up to 1 billion, as I said, due to be launched in the next couple of weeks and months. But the reality is that the outturn for the year will be significantly less than the record volumes we would have seen in the last couple of years. But this trend is consistent with what we're experiencing in most investment markets right across Europe at the moment. Considering the volume of liquidity that has built up over the last couple of months and investor appetite for Irish real estate assets, this sector of the market has the potential to rebound quickly once economic activity improves. Q3 will see a resumption in activity. However, until such time as travel restrictions are lifted and investors can travel safely to inspect and assess opportunities, this will be a constraining factor for the market.
What has been happening with yields?
With the direction of yields across Europe having adjusted slightly, prime yields in the Irish market, with the exception of retail of course, have been resilient despite the pandemic. For many sectors of the market, including offices, industrial and multifamily, as opposed to a contraction in yields during 2020, there's actually been no change. Whereas if we look at things like the retail, hotel, student accommodation sectors, they have experienced some softening.
The multifamily sector appears to be performing well despite COVID.
Yes, cash flows and yields in this sector have been particularly resilient, and we've continued to see strong appetite for multifamily product over the last few months. And prime yields in this sector stable at around 3.75%. While investors clearly have a preference to acquire complete stock or partially complete stock, the reality is that this product is scarce. Therefore, most investors are accessing product by acquiring stock with planning permission, but which has not yet gone on site and under construction. It may prove possible, given the nature of these type of forward sale transactions, to actually conduct these sales processes remotely. Several sales processes have conducted off-market in the multifamily sector. There's a few underway at the moment, and equally there's quite a lot of multifamily assets currently being prepared for sale, due to be formally launched and offered to the market and to investors in targeted processes over the coming weeks. Demand for investment in social leasing has also picked up pace since the new government reiterated their commitment to increase the volume of social housing provision.
What about the development land sector?
There's very few sales processes underway at present in the land sector. The outturn for the year will be considerably down on last year. There has, however, been an increase in pitching in the last couple of weeks, and that should lead to an increase in sites being publicly offered for sale in the autumn. It's likely that many of these sites will be receivership sales. For the most part, vendors remain reluctant to bring sites to the market in the current climate. This is despite the fact that house prices have actually held up well during the last 6 months. I think most developers at this point are focusing their efforts on planning and designing schemes with a view to lodging or securing planning permissions. In some cases, their exit will be a lease to the local authority or to an approved housing body to capitalise on that substantial demand for social housing provision and obviously the urgent need to reduce housing lists right across the country. Developers have welcomed the expansion of the Help to Buy scheme announced as part of the government's July economic stimulus plan. However, stimulus measures such as this, while welcome, are arguably feeding the demand side of the equation as opposed to the supply side, which remains severely constrained. And in fact, only about 8,200 houses were developed in the whole country in the first half of 2020.
I'm presuming you are still seeing strong demand for healthcare properties.
Yes, and certainly in the COVID era that we're in right now, recently released CSO data shows that 14.5% of Ireland's population are now aged over 65, and that's up from about 11.3% only a decade ago and expected to continue rising. So it demonstrates the need to provide additional modern nursing home accommodation and healthcare facilities throughout the country over the next number of years. So obviously it is a sector that investors are keen to continue to invest in. We've seen several transactions in the first half of 2020, and we can expect to see further consolidation in this sector over the next 6 months. Turnover in every nursing home will have been negatively impacted during the first 6 months of the year as a result of COVID-19 and the direct impact on occupancy levels. There has, however, been no evidence at all of any deterioration in values of nursing homes or no diminution in the multiples for good quality future-proofed nursing home stock. Buyers remain very, very focused on investing into this sector, and they're paying particular attention to the quality and the performance of these assets, and they're willing to pay premium pricing for the best properties. There is, however, and it's probably not surprising, much greater scrutiny on the configuration of nursing home buildings with respect to infection control. Operators are concerned about the possible introduction by HIQA of additional infection control measures and wondering how these will be implemented alongside other standards that were due to be enforced in December 2021 anyway, as a combination of these standards will ultimately determine whether certain nursing homes will or won't survive into the future. I think it's fair to say that smaller facilities may come off the worst here, as they are unlikely to have the capacity to change their physical or clinical configuration.
The hotel industry has been very severely impacted by COVID, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Most Irish hoteliers will never forget the summer of 2020, with COVID restrictions having impacted so significantly on normal trading patterns and performance. City centre hotels in Dublin were particularly negatively impacted by the lack of international tourists, business travellers and office workers during the summer months, while hotels all over the country suffered from a lack of weddings and sporting events and other events. The most recent STR data actually showed that occupancy in Irish hotels during July was approximately 2/3 lower than what it would have been in the same period last year. In contrast, some hotels in regional locations, particularly those in coastal locations, were insulated to some degree, having benefited from an increase in domestic tourism in 2020. So in addition to reduced revenues and profitability, hoteliers have for the most part also had to contend with the weakening in yields in the hotel sector.
What more can the government do to help the sector?
The government and other organisations have made genuine efforts to introduce stimulus packages to subsidise payroll and help hoteliers in other ways, but without measures such as a more significant reduction in the VAT rate, it remains to be seen whether all of these initiatives will be sufficient to compensate hoteliers for the extent of trade that they've actually lost since March. The owners and operators of hotels have understandably been primarily focused on the survival of their businesses over the last couple of months. From a property perspective, several mandates and hotel processes were put on hold, and as a result, transactional activity in the hotel sector in the first half of the year certainly was disappointingly low. However, some buyers are keen to take advantage of acquisition opportunities in the current climate, and negotiations have slowly started to reignite recently on some of the assets that were being formally marketed before COVID struck. There's some activity underway off market, and there's particular appetite at the moment for hotel development projects. We expect a relatively low level of transactional activity in this particular sector for the foreseeable future, until such time as hoteliers and investors can travel safely to inspect the hotel buildings, and until there's greater visibility on trading performance.
So how has the Cork market been performing?
Activity has been quite subdued in Cork over recent months, both from an occupier and an investment viewpoint. Having said that, there are a couple of occupier deals which are in legals, and this will provide a boost for the market in due course. There has been a welcome increase in office inquiries for Cork in recent months, albeit it probably will be later in 2020 or indeed into early 21 before these translate into actual leasing deals. It was encouraging to see the IDA recently announcing that they are looking to identify up to 5 large-scale, and by that I mean 50 to 100 acre strategic sites in both Cork and Limerick to facilitate life science and data centre requirements over the coming years. For now, prime, office and industrial sectors of the market in Cork are holding up firm, but we would expect to see some downward pressure on retail rents in the city in due course.
So in summary, September marks a turning point for the property market in many respects. But 2020's autumn season will be considerably different to normal.
Yes, there's no doubt that we're going to see an increase in transactional activity over the next couple of weeks and months, most notably in the investment sector of the market, as I said. But vendors and landlords will have to be innovative, so they'll have to consider many potential occupiers, and investors just won't be in a position to travel to inspect buildings anytime soon, We're truly in unprecedented times, but the continued low interest rate environment, coupled with the volume of unallocated capital positions, means that there's now considerable equity looking to deploy into Irish real estate, and that is encouraging despite the economic backdrop.
To download the report and for other news stories, go to news.cbre.ie.